I've always been drawn to wild places. Ever since I was young, my idea of a perfect vacation has been hiking trails or fishing in quiet lakes, not crowded resorts or tourist attractions. My girlfriend Maya shares this passion for the outdoors. It's actually one of the main reasons we connected 6 months ago. Last month, we decided to try something different from our usual forest and mountain trips. We chose the desert for a 3-day camping experience. Neither of us had spent much time in desert environments before. The appeal was the isolation, the vastness, and especially the night sky. Since we started dating, we often drove beyond the city limits just to lie on the hood of my truck and watch the stars appear. When we read about this particular spot being far from any light pollution, the decision was easy. I found a location online that was remote but legal to camp on. No facilities, just open land, a few stone fire rings left by previous campers, and an unobstructed view of the sky. It sounded perfect for what we wanted. We packed my truck with all our gear on Friday morning and made the 4-hour journey. The final stretch was on an unmarked dirt road that seemed endless, with nothing but open desert in every direction. By the time we arrived and set up camp, the sun was already low in the sky. The first 2 days were exactly what we had hoped for. The days were warm and dry, the nights cool enough for a campfire. We would sit together with drinks in hand, sharing stories, and watching the incredible canopy of stars emerge above us. Not having phone signals or any schedule to follow was remarkably refreshing. Both nights, however, we heard something unusual. The sound came from somewhere far in the distance, a long, drawn-out noise that resembled a howl or moan. It didn't sound human, but it didn't quite match any animal sound I recognized either. The first night, Maya and I both paused our conversation when we heard it. She looked at me with raised eyebrows, silently asking if I had heard it too. I nodded, but suggested it was probably just a coyote or some other desert wildlife. We laughed it off and continued our evening. The second night, we heard it again at roughly the same time. The sound was distinctive enough that we immediately recognized it. Again, we dismissed it as desert wildlife, though I noticed Maya glanced over her shoulder more frequently for the rest of the evening. On the third night, I woke suddenly to the sound of footsteps outside our tent. The soft crunching of sand and gravel was faint at first, but unmistakable. These weren't animal movements. They were too deliberate, too measured. Someone was walking slowly around our campsite. I remained completely still, barely breathing. My muscles tensed as I listened to the steps approach the tent and then stop nearby. For what felt like minutes, there was complete silence. I wanted to wake Maya, to reach for the flashlight beside me, but I couldn't move. Fear had paralyzed me. Then came a sharp clicking sound, the distinct sound of a lighter flicking open. A small orange glow appeared through the fabric of the tent, about waist height and a few feet to the side. The light hovered there for several seconds, then began to move in slow, deliberate patterns. Suddenly, the glow intensified. Whatever our visitor had lit was much larger than just a cigarette or a small lighter. I heard something drop onto the ground outside with a dull thud, and in the next moment, the side of our tent illuminated with a bright, growing light. Heat spread rapidly as flames began to consume the fabric. The immediate danger finally broke my paralysis. I shook Maya awake, and her eyes widened in immediate understanding. We scrambled to grab what we could reach and threw ourselves out of the burning tent. Maya grabbed our water container and started dousing the flames while I stomped out the burning patches that had spread to the ground. Eventually, we contained the fire, but half our tent was completely destroyed. I swept the flashlight beam across the surrounding desert, searching for whoever had just tried to harm us. There was no one visible in any direction, just the empty, dark desert stretching into the night. Without discussion, we began gathering our essential belongings. We started walking in what we hoped was the direction of the truck, but in the darkness, with no landmarks to guide us, we quickly became disoriented. That's when we heard it again, the same distant cry we'd heard the previous nights. Only this time, it didn't fade away. The howl continued, and then another similar cry joined it from a different direction, and then another. Multiple voices were calling out across the desert, all from behind us. I grabbed Maya's hand and we moved faster, no longer concerned about what we might leave behind. By sheer luck, we stumbled upon my truck. We threw our salvage belongings into the back and climbed in. I started the engine and drove away as quickly as the rough terrain would allow. I couldn't drive too fast on the uneven dirt road, with only headlights to guide us, but I pushed the speed as much as I dared. When we finally reached paved road, I maintained our pace until we saw the lights of other vehicles and buildings in the distance. Maya held herself together remarkably well, but I could see her hands trembling. I wasn't doing much better myself. We reported the incident to local police when we reached the nearest town, but I knew how it would go. A file would be created and forgotten. No evidence, no witnesses, just another strange desert story. All I can think about now is how close we came to death that night. If I hadn't awakened when I did, if we hadn't reacted as quickly as we did, Maya and I might have become another unsolved mystery in the vast emptiness of the desert. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I hear that distant, inhuman cry, and I wonder what exactly was out there in the darkness, watching us. This happened just a few weeks ago. I'm finishing up my senior year in high school, and I've lived in coastal Maine my entire life. There's not much excitement around here during the off-season, but one activity my friends and I have always enjoyed is urban exploring. We search for abandoned buildings, old coastal bunkers, forgotten lighthouses, anything that feels like it's been left behind by time. We'd slip through broken fences, capture photos, sometimes venture up crumbling staircases or down into flooded basements. We weren't vandals or thieves, we just loved the atmosphere of these forgotten places. The friend in our group who consistently discovered the most unsettling locations was Elijah. He was always the quiet, introspective type. He'd just appear with coordinates to places none of us had ever heard about. Usually, I didn't bother asking how he found them. Then one evening, he sent a screenshot from some obscure Reddit thread. Low karma account, grainy images, bizarre comments filling the post. The title simply read, "Abandoned lighthouse on a private island near Puffin Point. Locals won't go near it after sunset." According to Elijah, he'd been messaging with the account owner, who provided rough directions to a spot where we could launch a boat. That was all Elijah needed to hear. He became instantly obsessed with the idea. That Saturday, it was just me, Elijah, and our other friend Mia. I had access to my uncle's fishing boat that was perfect for coastal exploration, so we took that. We didn't have a specific address, just a general area and GPS coordinates somewhere off the jagged Maine coastline. The location Elijah had marked was seriously remote, far from any tourist spots or fishing areas. We'd left the harbor almost 40 minutes earlier, and the choppy water we navigated barely resembled the calm routes on our maps. We searched for what seemed like hours. No signs, no structures, no landmarks, just endless gray water meeting gray sky. I kept checking my phone, though I knew reception was spotty out here. Mia was in the back, growing increasingly frustrated. She started telling Elijah this whole excursion was pointless, and that he'd been misled by some internet troll. Elijah insisted we keep looking, so we continued. He's always been stubborn about directions, so I figured I'd humor him a bit longer. Eventually, just as we were about to turn back, Mia pointed to something through the mist ahead. Initially, it looked like just another rocky outcropping, but as we approached, we saw it. A half-collapsed stone lighthouse built on a tiny island. Part of the tower had crumbled away, but you could still see the lantern room at the top, its glass panes mostly shattered. It wasn't enormous, but it was definitely man-made. Definitely a lighthouse. Elijah didn't speak at first. He just pulled out his phone, marked the coordinates on his offline map, and turned to Mia with a smug, "Told you." She just rolled her eyes and said he got lucky. But even I had to admit, it was pretty remarkable. We'd been drifting through fog in the middle of nowhere, and somehow, we'd actually found it. I anchored about 20 yards from the island at a natural stone pier. We all climbed out and collected our gear. Elijah had even brought headlamps for everyone. The three of us walked up to the lighthouse, and it looked even more decrepit up close. Elijah picked up a small rock and tossed it through an open doorway. We waited. A few seconds later, we heard it echo 3 times. Then, nothing. The interior was cavernous. Elijah glanced back at us and said, "If we fell on those stone stairs inside, we'd probably break our necks." We began our exploration anyway. Fortunately, the entrance wasn't completely blocked. It sloped up at a gradual angle, but the steps were cracked and uneven. The stone walls were covered in dark green algae, and there were rusty metal brackets where handrails once existed. Surprisingly, the structure seemed reasonably stable. The higher we climbed, the colder and quieter it became. There was something deeply unsettling about the silence. We couldn't even hear the waves crashing outside anymore. Eventually, we reached what felt like the main keeper's quarters. The stairwell opened into a wider circular room with several doorways branching off in different directions. It looked exactly how you'd imagine. Old iron fixtures corroded by salt air, rotted wooden furniture half collapsed, and a thick layer of dust on everything. There were fragments of logbooks and charts scattered around, maybe parts of the lighthouse keeper's records. The air smelled strongly of brine and decay. I was grateful for the masks Elijah had insisted we wear. We chose a doorway and started exploring. None of us said much. We weren't searching for anything specific, just taking in the atmosphere. There wasn't much interesting stuff up there. The place looked like it had been stripped of anything valuable decades ago. But then, we heard something. It was faint, coming from somewhere higher up in the tower. It sounded like something scraping against stone. At first I thought I'd imagined it, but I noticed Elijah had stopped moving too. Mia gestured for us to turn off our headlamps, so we did. We stood there in complete darkness, listening. The sound returned. It was a sort of grinding noise, like stone sliding against stone. It was difficult to pinpoint with the echo, but whatever it was seemed to be getting closer. We remained motionless in the darkness for maybe 30 seconds, maybe a full minute. Hard to tell. The scraping continued, gradually becoming louder. It didn't sound particularly close, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. Then, Mia accidentally bumped her headlamp against a wall, causing it to flicker on and off. I wanted to scream at her. The scraping abruptly stopped, and everything went silent. Then, without warning, there was this horrible grinding crash from somewhere above us in the tower, like a massive stone had just been dislodged. And immediately after came the most spine-chilling wail I've ever heard. It barely sounded human. We turned and fled, not caring how much noise we made. I've never moved so fast in my life. I could hear something scrambling down the stairs behind me, and I thought my heart would burst from my chest. I was last in line trying to keep pace when I tripped on a broken step. My headlamp flew off, and I struggled to stay upright. I didn't have time to retrieve it, so I just kept going, trying to navigate in near darkness. Ahead, Elijah and Mia had already reached the exit and were sprinting toward the boat. I practically threw myself down the last flight of stairs. When I tell you descending those slippery stone steps in darkness was the most terrifying experience of my life, I'm not exaggerating. It was horrifying. I could feel something closing the distance behind me with each step. If not for the adrenaline pumping through my veins, I don't think I would have made it out alive. By the time I finally stumbled into the open air, my lungs were burning. I needed Elijah and Mia to practically drag me the last few yards to the boat. I couldn't pilot like that, so Mia took the wheel. I barely had time to collapse in the bottom of the boat before she gunned the engine. I don't think we were followed out of the lighthouse, but we weren't sticking around to confirm. We sped through the fog in silence all the way back to the harbor. I thought the terror might cause me to black out. I ended up with several deep cuts that required stitches, and even after everything was cleaned and bandaged, I couldn't sleep properly for days. A week later, once I could move without wincing, Mia told us she'd dropped her favorite pocket knife somewhere near the lighthouse, probably when she was helping me into the boat. She hadn't mentioned it at the time, but now thought it might be worth going back, just to the island's edge, absolutely not back inside. So, the three of us reluctantly returned, using the coordinates Elijah had saved. Obviously, Mia's knife was nowhere to be found, but we did discover something. My headlamp. It was sitting just outside the lighthouse entrance. I cautiously approached and picked it up. It was crushed, like someone or something had deliberately smashed it. The lens was completely shattered, and the metal casing was twisted and warped like it had been squeezed by something impossibly strong. We didn't stay a moment longer after that. None of us can provide a rational explanation. You might suggest it was just some squatter living in the lighthouse, but if that were the case, how could they survive out there? There was no food, no fresh water. What would they eat? Elijah said that Reddit account was deleted when he tried to message about what happened. It's going to be a very long time before I do any urban exploring on the coast again. I've always wondered about my father's past. Wondered isn't exactly the right word, but I struggle to find a better one. He emigrated from Mexico when he was in his early 20s, crossing into Arizona with nothing but a small backpack and the clothes he wore. The official story is simple. He came for opportunity, found work at a construction company, met my mother, and settled into American life. But there are gaps in this narrative that grow more noticeable the older I get. My father never speaks about his life in Mexico. When family discussions drift toward childhood memories, he redirects the conversation with practiced ease. At gatherings, relatives occasionally hint at things, exchanging glances when certain topics arise, or falling silent when my father enters the room. What I know is limited. He grew up in a small town near Ciudad Juarez. His mother died when he was young. His father worked for a shipping company that operated along the border. Whenever I press for details, he smiles and says, "The past stays in the past for good reasons, Mija." My mother once told me, during a rare moment of candor, that my father came from a complicated family situation. She said his father had two sides to his business, the public face and something else she wouldn't name. "Some doors are better left closed," she added, ending the conversation. The name Vega is the only other clue I have. When I was 12, I overheard my father speaking on the phone late at night. The house was dark and I was supposed to be asleep. His voice was low, intense. He repeated Vega several times, each mention carrying a weight I couldn't understand but instinctively feared. When the floorboard creaked beneath my foot, he turned with an expression I had never seen before, alert, cold, calculating. He ended the call immediately and told me to go back to bed. We never spoke about it. These fragments formed the mosaic of my father's hidden past. I learned to stop asking direct questions, but never stopped wondering. Last summer, everything changed. I was driving back from visiting a college friend in New Mexico, taking a remote highway through the desert to save time. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty landscape. I called my father to let him know my estimated arrival time. We were discussing an upcoming family reunion when I noticed a pickup truck parked sideways across the road about half a mile ahead. As I got closer, I saw two men standing beside it. They waved their arms, signaling me to stop. My first instinct was to help. Perhaps they had broken down in this desolate stretch. I slowed down and mentioned the situation to my father. "Where exactly are you?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp. I described my location as precisely as I could, mentioning the mile marker I had passed recently. "Listen carefully," he said. "Do not stop. Drive around them if possible. If not, turn around immediately." The urgency in his voice sent a chill through me. Before I could respond, I noticed another vehicle approaching rapidly from behind. "Dad, there's another car coming up fast behind me. I'm boxed in." There was a moment of silence. Then my father spoke, his voice now eerily calm. "Pull over. Keep the call connected. Say nothing about who you're talking to." I did as instructed. The truck behind me stopped about 30 feet back. 3 men emerged from the vehicles ahead. One carried a handgun casually at his side. My heart hammered against my ribs as they approached. The man with the gun tapped on my window. I lowered it slightly. "Wallet, phone, keys," he said in accented English. I fumbled with my belongings, hands shaking. My father was still on the line, but I couldn't speak to him. I handed over my wallet and keys, but managed to leave my phone in the cup holder, screen down, call still connected. The man looked through my wallet, examining my driver's license. His expression changed subtly when he read my last name. He barked something in Spanish to the others. I caught my surname and little else. One of the other men leaned into my car and picked up my phone. I tensed, certain he would end the call. Instead, he studied the screen and put the phone to his ear. I watched his face transform from confusion to shock. He stepped away from the car, speaking rapidly in Spanish. I heard him say "Vega" distinctly, followed by a string of words I couldn't understand. The conversation lasted perhaps 2 minutes. The man returned, handed me my phone with the call ended, then my keys and wallet. The only thing missing was the cash, about $80. "Road tax," he said with an unsettling smile. "Drive safe." They returned to their vehicles. Before leaving, the man who had spoken on the phone looked at me one last time. "Tell your father, Emilio sends regards. Family is everything, no?" I drove away with unsteady hands, watching in my rearview mirror as both vehicles turned off the highway onto a dirt road, disappearing into the desert. When I called my father back, he answered immediately. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No, they took my cash, but nothing else." I paused. "Dad, what just happened? They knew who you were. One of them mentioned someone named Emilio." Silence stretched between us. Finally, he spoke. "Sometimes the past reaches forward, no matter how far you run from it." "Who is Vega?" I asked directly. Another long pause. "A ghost, someone who should no longer exist." "Dad, please, I need to know. What were you involved in? Who are these people?" "When I left Mexico, I made arrangements," he said carefully. "Certain debts were paid, certain promises were made. It should have been finished." "Were you part of a cartel?" I asked, the question I had feared for years finally finding voice. "No." His answer came too quickly. "But I knew people who were. My father, your grandfather, had connections. When he died, those connections became mine to deal with." "And Vega? A family name. a powerful one in certain circles. I helped them once. They have long memories. When I got home that night, my father was waiting. We sat at the kitchen table until dawn while he told me about his father's secret business partnerships, about growing up surrounded by dangerous men who treated him like family, about the things he witnessed and the choice he made to leave it all behind. He showed me a small box he kept locked in his closet. Inside was an old photograph of him as a teenager, standing beside an older man with cold eyes. On the back, one word was written, Vega. I've tried to protect you from this shadow, my father said. But now that they know about you, you need to understand what our name means to certain people. I live with this knowledge now. Every unknown car that slows near our house, every stranger who looks at me a moment too long, they all carry the possibility of that desert connection. My father says we're safe, that his old arrangement still holds despite the encounter. But sometimes I catch him standing at the window late at night, watching the street with the vigilance of someone who knows exactly what might be waiting in the darkness. And I wonder what other shadows from his past are making their way toward us, crossing the border between then and now, between his secrets and my life. I keep thinking about the man's parting words. Family is everything. I'm beginning to understand that, in my father's world, this was never just a saying. It was a warning,